Hi guys, so today I want to speak about Clariel, which is quite a big young adult fantasy book by Garth Nix because I'm really invested in the Old Kingdom series. I read it when I was really young. It was actually the first, well, Sabriel was actually the first book I ever read that didn't have pictures. I think I might have been as young as 6 when I first read it, which is probably too young because there are like dead people and people getting stabbed. I absolutely loved it from the beginning. It's probably one of the reasons that I am a writer myself. So the Old Kingdom series is by Garth Nix, who's an Australian author. It starts with Sabriel, continues with Clariel, and ends with Abhorsen. So I'm just going to say there are going to be spoilers in this video. I really want to speak in depth about the events of Clariel to really go into what I liked about it and what I felt could have been better. So here's the spoiler-free section of my review. Garth Nix fucking rocks. Go and get Sabriel if you haven't read any of the Old Kingdom series. See what you think. You can pick up Clariel because it is a standalone, but Sabriel is just so great. This isn't a story thing, but one thing that really bugs me about the cover and the figure here, I stared at it like a dozen times while I was reading because I was like, I want to see what you look like. She has long hair and it pisses me off because one of the first things you learn about her is that she has short hair. So that really bugged me. Read the fucking book, cover artists, come on. So that's the spoiler-free part of my opinion. So Clariel is a prequel. Clariel takes place 600 years before the events in Sabriel, and basically like an origin story about Claur of the Mask, who was a necromancer and a villain in Clariel and Abhorsen. It is really creepy. She wears this bronze mask and she is very powerful and very scary. So already you have a really different setup and dynamic from Sabriel and Clariel, because these are really straightforward, sort of heroic stories. There aren't really these moral ambiguities like there are in Clariel. No matter how much you grow to like Clariel, you know that she is going to end up Claur of the Mask. So I found that I was hyper aware of that while I was reading it. You're just waiting for it to happen, you know? So, the story. Clariel is a young woman. She moves to Belisare, which is the capital city of the Old Kingdom, which is this big, industrious city with all these guilds. Her mum is a super famous goldsmith, and that's why they move. And Clariel hates it. She wants to be a ranger in the Great Forest. She wants to get back home. She hates the noise. She hates the city. She hates all the lies and the political bullshit. So Clariel, her goal from the beginning is to escape Belisare, and she ends up getting tangled in the political sort of struggles in Belisare at the time. The king is really reclusive and has stepped back and isn't really doing anything. There are people vying for power and making deals with bad, terrible creatures. So there are 2 kinds of magic in the Old Kingdom series. This is the first time we've had a main character who isn't particularly fussed about charter magic, which is a huge part of Sabriel, Clariel, Sam's power. We have Clariel, who doesn't really get charter magic. She doesn't really understand it, but she has this berserk rage, which we see in the original books in Touchstone, which gives her sort of super strength and stuff like that, but can also be really dangerous. And that marks her out as someone who is sort of like attracted to or connected with free magic, which is something that we have only ever seen be terrible, has only ever ended up in death and destruction. It's a kind of dramatic irony because we know, based on the other books and what happens later on, that like there is no good free magic really. Clariel is trying to do good. She's trying to help people. She's trying to stop the evil governor guy, Kilp, but she doesn't understand the difference between charter magic and free magic. It has this sort of magnetic allure to her, and free magic creatures can speak to her. Tragic story. It has to be a tragic story, because we know that Clariel is going to end up being sucked in by free magic, because when we meet her as Claur of the Mask, she is a free magic sorcerer and she's not really a person anymore. Through the book, you're just kind of like, free magic's bad. Clariel, stop it. Put that down. So you're always starting from this point of cynicism. I think Garth Nix does an alright job of making you kind of question that assumption, making you be like, oh, maybe free magic isn't all that bad. Maybe this is just like another point of view. Maybe it's all about how you use it. But the end just shoots that horse in the face. It turns out that Clariel was deceived by the free magic creatures Aziminal and the one that begins with B, Bazal Manan. Which makes it a really weird read. Clariel does end sort of hopefully. She makes this massive mistake in trusting in free magic. So at the end of the book, Clariel is setting off in this boat for somewhere north of the Old Kingdom, which is sort of uncharted territory to us as readers. Which is a cool concept, but it just feels a bit like cheating. The author's note at the end, for instance, says, Clariel is of course Claw of the Mask, who appears at the beginning of Lyriel, having been drawn south by the reawakened powers of Uranus. As to what she did in the intervening years between the events of this book and those in Lyriel, who can say? I can say she continued to make mistakes and ended up being evil. It's hard. It's really hard to watch that happen to a character. I mean, it's not a full tragedy in that it doesn't go all the way to what we know happens to Clariel, which is that she becomes Claw. We know from the beginning that this is a descent. This is not an ascent. Gabriel and Lyriel, who start off as sort of pretty ordinary young women and end up being heroes. Tragedies are so much harder to write, and I'm not sure that the end of this feels satisfying. It just makes it hard to love it because I can't completely love Clariel, and that's such a big part of why I love the other books. I also feel like the ending was quite rushed. It didn't feel like it was developed fully. I did read it really quickly, so I'm not sure on that. I did actually learn some things about writing from reading this book. For all its problems, and I think there are a few, Garth Nix is a fantastic storyteller. So I'm at the point here where Clariel has just been freed from Kilp's prison by Cargrin, and Cargrin is updating her basically on the situation of the kingdom and saying Kilp has basically seized power. This is a narrative change in that the situation for Clariel has changed. She's gone from one state to another, and that's a core concept in storytelling. It's the thing that makes a story and not just random things happening. I find it really difficult to distinguish what is a change. The reality, if you can say there is a reality, doesn't change here because Clariel is not involved in the coup. She is not caught up in it. But from a narrative point of view, it's the exact same. Her being told by Cargrin that this has happened is the exact same as being caught up in it herself, because it still changes the situation for her. It means that she has different choices now. And this is a really important distinction for me, because as a writer, I find it really difficult to pin down if a change counts. Like, do characters discovering things count as a change? Because nothing has actually changed except that they know. Maybe that's a really obvious point, but just that point in the book really illustrated that for me. It's really cool to find stuff like that just from reading and not from writing advice. It was always going to be hard for this book to live up to any expectations about it. It's great to be back in the Old Kingdom world and see new things happening there. It was really interesting reading an Old Kingdom book as an adult rather than a child. Something about it just didn't quite hit the mark for me. Maybe it's just impossible to get back that kind of connection with a book which you read as a kid. I'm still not sure if part of my inability to connect to it in the same way is just the fact that I'm an adult now and I connect to things differently, and I'm looking for that sort of nostalgia, which is like the fucking like green light on the pier in Gatsby, you know, it's like you can chase it forever. I think one of the core things that makes the Old Kingdom series so great is the relationships and people building bonds. But Clariel is by nature basically a loner. She allies herself with people, but she doesn't really have friends, and I think that is part of what makes it's a sad book, I think. So, in conclusion, yeah, Clariel's a great book. You'll enjoy it. I just don't know if I can hack tragedies in the Old Kingdom. Yeah, I want to know what you guys thought of Clariel. I've only seen really cursory sort of like, oh, I loved it videos. What did you love about it? How did you deal with the tragedy element? Like, how do you reconcile that with the other books? And did you feel satisfied with the ending? So yeah, let me know what you thought. And I'll see you next time.